What's going on, good people? I wanted to do a live, um, specifically a live on this idea that you should only buy homes if your home is an asset. Um, what's going on, real estate cash? What's going on, Rashana Scott? How can you get rich by using a team? You can get rich by using a team. Um, so yeah, a lot of people are like, "Oh yeah, don't buy a house because a house isn't an asset." And I kind of wanted to discuss why I think that conversation is, I guess, not self-defeating, but it doesn't help anything. I guess my first question is, if your home isn't an asset, then what is renting? Renting is like a double liability. It's like losing twice. If you're going to spend money, you might as well own what you're spending money on. Buy all the houses, not just one, exactly, all the homes. But it's just funny because people always say, like, oh, um, I had a conversation, a consulting call with somebody, and we were talking um, about how he wants to be debt free because, and so he's not willing to buy a house because he wants to be debt free. And so I said, do you know the difference between good debt and bad debt? And he was like, well, good debt is the debt that pays you, and bad debt is the debt that you pay for. And I was like, right. So does that mean that? And so, but his stance was still like, I don't want debt. I don't want debt. And I feel like that's one of the things that Jay Morrison talks about a lot is we got to start using credit and debt to get rich as opposed to using credit and debt to be broke. A lot of us are using credit and debt to get student loans to get degrees that aren't serving us, or using student loans or credit cards to go on vacations and take trips. But why don't we use that same money to elevate us and to create wealth for us? The biggest, largest companies all have debt. I always tell people that it's called net worth for a reason. It's called net worth because the debt's factored in. And so if you go onto the Forbes list, it's all net worth oriented. It's not how much do you own, it's how much do you own less what you owe, because the debt is implied. And so it's really a matter of like, what are you using your debt for? I think that's the better question. The concept of like being debt free is just silly. That's one of the things I agree with Grant Cardone on. Um, I just don't really, especially if you're using debt to create your wealth. I mean, it's one thing to use your debt to buy a car. It's one thing to use your debt to do whatever. But I mean, I think that we have to be strategic about what we're using debt for and intelligent about how we utilize that debt. And I think that that's what really matters. But what irks me is when we use logic to defy intelligence, meaning that somebody will say, I don't want to own the roof over my head because it's not an asset. Well, when did you start making all your purchases based on them being assets and liabilities? That's my first question. And the other is, just because it's not technically a financial asset doesn't mean it doesn't add value to your life. An asset adds value to your life. It's not just about what costs you money and what you're spending money on, because the problem is, if you're gonna spend, let's say you have a mortgage of $2,000 a month, but you could be paying rent of $2,500 a month. You're spending money anyway, right? But the thing is there's so many hidden benefits, financial benefits, social benefits that come with home ownership. And that's why I say, to me, it's not even just about the money. It's about the power. It's about the peace of mind. It's about knowing that nobody can pop up and say, oh, yeah, your rent's twice what it used to be. Oh, yeah, you got to move. That kind of stuff. It's like, to me, ownership, it's all inclusive. And the people that you're competing with, they're buying their homes. The people that you're competing with are owners. They own that business. They own that property. They own the car dealership that you're buying your car from. I think that's the most frustrating thing, is that, like I said, we only utilize logic when it comes to things that actually would benefit us. And I think that's the most frustrating thing. It's like, you could tell people, oh, you got to live life. You got to go take that trip. You got to go buy this. You got to go spend that. But then you tell them to do something that's actually going to elevate them, and they have all the logic in the world to justify why they won't do it. Then they start saying that a house is not an asset. Well, Neither is your car, but it still is valuable to your life. So I mean, if you look at the social benefits, there are studies that show that children that come from parents and families that own their own home, they tend to be less teenage pregnancies. They tend to be less people who go to jail. Tend to be less people who don't finish high school. They tend to be people who end up going to own their own home in the future. They tend to be people who positively impact that community. They tend to be people who can keep a job, who are responsible, who are able to keep that community up and happy and safe. And that's not even talking about the equity. That's not even talking about when you eventually pay that home off and you can leave it to your children who can then live there for free, which then can benefit their career because now they're working because they want to work, not because they have to work. So the benefits of home ownership far outweigh whether you have to spend money on it or not. I tell people like food's technically not an asset, but it's valuable to your life. Real estate and owning a home might not technically be an asset in that immediate moment, but it adds value to your life. But man, my hair looks pretty good in this light. I'm glowing like Rashonda Scott around here. Let's see. So I just wanted to touch on that. The other thing I want to touch on, since I have you here, I'm about to pin this one also. The other thing I want to touch on is this. I'm going to pin it. It is Burr. Coin. Dang. Post my message. All right, so the next thing I want to talk about, if I could pin this tweet, pin it. All right, so the next thing I want to talk about is that post that we put up. I wish Money Maydu was here so we could talk about this together. But Money Maydu is a very educated and informed individual. And he posted something that I really, it resonated with me. And he said something along the lines of, these people who are investing in Burr are going to be up a creek when the market turns. And so people are like, the market's not going to turn. Rents are only going to go up. And like, don't you guys hear what you're saying? Like, you guys are saying what people were saying when they're saying real estate only goes up when they're buying all these properties as flips and it's buy and holds on the premise that they were going to buy up. And so they're buying higher and they're buying higher and they're buying higher. And so the only reason why I tell this, it's not to burst your bubble. I'm not trying to hate. I'm not trying to say, don't buy real estate, don't buy rental properties. I'm just telling you, be intelligent in how you do it, because cash out refi is nothing but debt. And so a lot of people, they're refining out and they're taking on debt. And that's my problem with that, is that now you're responsible for $80,000, $90,000, $100,000 that somebody else has to pay for. And so the problem with that is now you have debt that you can't pay for. This does not apply to Aisha Selden. Why does not apply to Aisha Selden? It doesn't apply to her because she makes enough money in her professional career to afford those mortgages with or without tenants. You do not want to be in a position where you cannot afford your mortgage if somebody else isn't making that payment for you. And that's why Burr is a problem. This guy says, I used to listen to Bigger Pockets and I hated that they encouraged the Burr strategy so much. I'm not even real estate savvy, but I just didn't sit well with me. Right. I feel like in a lot of ways, Burr has become Bitcoin. And I'll tell you why. Burr, the strategy in itself makes sense. It's so funny because when we were in the process of looking to flip a property, and I was like, well, what's the alternative strategy? Like, if I can't sell it, if I can't do whatever I got to do, then I can just refinance out of it. And so for me, like, it just made sense. Like, I'll just refi it. It's worth more. There's equity in it. I'll refi it. And this is before I even knew of Burr. But I always tell people, like, Burr came out of necessity. Burr wasn't his original strategy. That's just what he ended up falling into, right? And so the problem is, if he would have had to go with his original exit plan, which was a flip, then he would have lost. And so the benefit is now he can refi out of it. My question to you is this. If you are somebody who is only looking to Burr, meaning you only have one exit and you cannot Burr, then what are you going to do? Or say, for example, you do Burr and then the market ends up shifting against you, then what are you going to do? So Rashana is absolutely right. You have to have multiple exit strategies. And so for me, that's what we do. every home that we buy, we're like, okay, we can either sell or finance this, we could sell it outright for cash, or we can rent it out long term, or we can refinance it and put debt on it. I've been very hesitant to put debt onto the property. And it's so crazy because I had this conversation with Ponji Barnes on a prior episode, and it's like all doors aren't created equal. If you have 10 solid doors that are cash flowing, 100% no debt, versus somebody who might have 35 doors and they have debt on those properties, your numbers might still look the same, but you're also a lot more secure. Because what can happen, and this is what I've been telling people, is a lot of people think that a crash is going to be a crash like what we saw before. And so somebody even cited the stats. They said, oh, if you look at the stats, rents have only gone up from 2007 until present. I'm like, bro, do you think we'll ever have another 2007 again? If you're banking on that as your strategy, that is a misstep in itself. That's a flawed analysis, because you're basically saying that if we have another great recession, we'll be all right. That was like a once in a generation recession. And so you have to realize that like America is an ownership nation. And so what's going to happen is people are going to kind of tend to drift towards home ownership, which we're seeing. We have all these different states that are coming up with grants. We have interest rates being lowered so people can afford to buy homes. We have people building up more single family homes now as opposed to just apartments. Apartments, in my opinion, are a recession investment. And if you're not in a recession, does it make sense to invest in recession-based assets? It doesn't make sense. So that's why we bought single family homes, and that's why we didn't load up on a bunch of apartment complex. A part of it is because the numbers just pointed us into that direction, and we tried to make a large-scale multifamily deal work. We were looking in Arizona, we were looking in Nevada, we were looking in even California, and the cap rates are just so low that it made it seem like you were paying money to have an investment with a negative return, negative cash flow. So I just feel like be very conscious of what you're buying. And like Ponji Barnes said, just because you flip it doesn't mean you have to refinance it. Just because you have the equity doesn't mean you have to cash out that equity. Sometimes you just got to have the equity tied into a property. And I think that might be the more intelligent solution. It's more difficult because a lot of people have hard money. But I mean, one of the problems with the BRRRR method is it allows you to cheat the system, right? Because when you buy a property, they want to know that you have the cash, the means to put a down payment on that property. But if you are doing something where you can now buy multiple properties with the same down payment, you're kind of hacking the system, but you're hacking the system against you. So that's all I got to say about that. Rashana Scott is dropping gems in the comments. Leave the equity in if you don't need it right away. The rental economy isn't going away anytime soon. Lies told on Twitter. You're going to be waiting forever if you're waiting for 2007. I agree with that statement. So many people are waiting on a recession. They're like, oh, when a recession comes, I'm going to invest. Like, you got to find a recession. You know where you find a recession? Where there's a depression. And there's a lot of depressions going on in America. You can look in Philly, you can look in Baltimore, you can look in Cleveland, you can look in good old Detroit. But you got to find a recession. That's my thing. It's like Jim Cramer says. He says there's always a bull market somewhere. Yeah, I think we got it all. Rashawn Scott says go to the tax sales. I agree with that statement. There's a tax sale in Detroit in October. We bought a property that's not in the greatest condition, but we got it for a steal. We bought this property. It's a duplex at the tax auction for like $3,000. And I think we could sell it for 15, but I don't believe in selling. There's a lot of affordable properties in the Midwest, guys. Don't sleep on the Midwest. I should be being productive right now. About to send this check for the rehab on Tracy, then also going to coordinate the closing for our triplex, and then also simultaneously coordinate them gutting the whole property so we can start rehab on that joker. Going to potentially be working with a really cool set of partners to rehab the triplex, and then also looking to close my 11 unit deal. So a lot of really cool stuff happening. One of these days I'll build my building in downtown LA. That's the real goal. Downtown LA, that's the real goal. Peace.